First of all, thank you for the invitation to be able to be here so I can talk a bit and give this therapy session. Thank you. I didn't know that in advance that it should be a therapeutic session, but I got this from the first few discussions and talks that I had already today. I am no longer, or haven't been for a while, professor at the University of Arts. I'm professor at HTW, that is the University of Applied Science in Berlin. I've only been there for 6 weeks now. Anyways, I'm here today with two flags or two hats on my head. One is being professor and researcher and educator, and another is that I'm a commissioner for digitality and new technologies for the DTHG. That is part of EUSTAT. It's the German Theatre Technical Society, or Association, I would translate it. And going to show you a slide about that later. In the last 3 years, I worked for this association, investigating, researching how immersive technologies in theater can get together and what happens then. But I have a slide for that. So yeah, Pablo Dornhege, you can call me Pablo, please. And how can live and digital go together? For me, digital and digitality has a lot to do with new realities. So my main title today that I sneaked in is Virtual, Augmented and Hybrid Stage Realities, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. First of all, to soften you up a bit, is what is extended realities anyways, and what is the combination or the connection between extended realities and theater? Spoiler alert, it's an old connection. The connection between theater and immersive technologies and virtual reality is an old connection. Then I will go into detail into the creative process of one of the projects, part of my research projects that I did, to show you how you already know how a creative process in the context of theater and opera might work, but how does it work differently when digitality is involved and these technologies are getting in there, because it's a bit different than we are used to do this in the theater. And then I will go into a little bit about what I am and the association that I am associated with will do in the next month, years, decades into this direction, and I hope that I will have a good discussion with you afterwards. So, an introduction into extended realities in the theater. First of all, I'm not going to ask the question, who knows what VR and AR is, I'm just going to kind of explain it. So virtual reality is a technology that simulates a complete surrounding digital environment, 3D environment normally, so visually. It is something that you put a headset on and completely dive into and are there. More or less no longer present, you are still physically present, but your mind, your understanding of space and everything is in there. Augmented reality is the overlaying of the physical world that surrounds us, table, you, something on stage, with digital elements that are added on top of it. And it can work either through a medium like a smartphone or a tablet or something like that, but it can also be augmented reality glasses that are still a bit bulky, but they get smaller and smaller, that you can see like really with your eyes, not through a monitor like on the phone, but really with your eyes you see the reality, but then you have a digital overlay on top of it. And those are not new technologies, right? So building a machine to simulate perspective, to simulate a 3D environment is nothing new. It's something that the theater already did for ages, right? So, I mean, basically we could go further back than that. Yeah, this is a machine, but already the process of saying, okay, yesterday I killed a mammoth on this somewhere there, and I'm showing you this and explaining you that, is also already creating an immaterial image of something that happened. And this performance already is, in a way, a virtual reality, because it shows you something. You experience it through the way that I perform it, without being there and without having seen it, but you have an understanding of what happened yesterday, maybe. So this Baroque stage could be seen in a way as similar to a virtual reality headset. It's a technology, it's a machine that helps me create a perspective, and it's a complicated machine. The good thing about the stage is it works for more people than just one. Augmented reality, also not very new. I mean, if we go to Pepper's Ghost, the idea of having a technology that adds an immaterial virtual layer on what happens on stage, augmenting the stage through an image, it's been there for a while. So we can use it differently. Today we can use projectors, we can use holographic gauzes that are there on stage, whatever, or we can use a smartphone or augmented reality glasses. But it's just the technology, the idea that stands behind it and how I use it in my creative process. It's nothing new. So that just to give you an idea of what is so new about it, and it's nothing that is there now, it's something that has evolved over time from the perspective of the technology, but it's not new. So what is virtual anyways? Virtual is, as a word, means it's something that exists in essence, and let's say it's visible, and it has an effect on you, yeah, as audience, for example, or the people receiving it, but without being there in physical form. And that is also something that Alvin, in his book about the theater as an intermediate realm, said what the theater is, or what's happening on stage, is the stage is built between this weird gap between what is real and what is not even there. So this is basically, you could say this is virtual reality. You could take the same sentence and use this as virtual reality and vice versa. This is more or less the therapeutic part. I'm cutting it short. But I think one of the biggest fears when being confronted with virtual technology, or virtual reality technology, and immersive technologies, is the not understanding, first of all, what the technology is, and seeing it as something new. I think not the virtual technology goes into theater. I would say theater has always been in virtual technology. It was always been there. It has always been there because it's part of our wish of creating worlds beyond what exists here right now. So yeah, theater is VR, not VR is something that goes into theater. So with this question in mind, a few years ago, so where I come from, I worked at the University of Arts at the time as artistic research associate, and at that time VR headsets came onto the market, and I was investigating how this technology can help museums create new fields of experience, new areas of knowledge transfer. And then a friend of mine approached me, Franziska Ritter, who worked at the Technical University in a similar field, and says, okay, I'm going to do a workshop about VR and theater. Do you want to participate? Do you want to make it with me together? Do you want to lead it? So we joined in the question of what happens when we bring theater together with immersive technologies. And this, just keep it away for a second. But the first idea was, okay, what happens when we bring those two fields together? Is there explosion? Is something new happening? Nothing happens. Let's see what's happening. And we did a workshop, and it was very successful. We had a 2 weeks workshop, and then people came, and we showed it at the PQ conference in Prague, for example. Our findings of these 2 weeks was very short, but very intense. And so many people came to us and said, okay, you have to go deeper into this topic. It is too interesting to be just a 2 weeks workshop and that's it. So we wrote a proposal and presented it to Mrs. Gritters, at that time Commissioner for Culture and for Culture and Media of the German government. And we had a proposition that we want to investigate with these two technologies, augmented and virtual reality that I showed you before, and theater, what happens there, what will be there. And so we did this together with the DTHG, the German Theater Technical Society. So they were the project leads. Some of you might know Hubert Eckert, as CEO from DTHG. And Franziska and I gathered a small team of people from different fields, so software fields and theater fields also, and brought them together and founded this competence center for digitality and new technologies inside this association. Well, so much about the framework, but what did we actually do? We had some ideas of how, so these are for us what we saw as the three fields of what the DTHG does. It works with the architecture of opera houses, of theater houses, so the building itself where it happens. It goes about the technology, lighting systems, sound systems, and so on, and about the stage and stage design, what happens directly on stage. But it's the whole thing about, well, everything that you see here that might not be happening right on the stage itself. So these are the three fields, and then we said, okay, and what can the technology be? The technology can be an experience. That is what most people think of first, virtual reality as an experience. But it can also be a tool that can be used in production of theater performances, and it can also be part of a communication or teaching or education of students working in these fields. So we had these different kinds of rotations, and we tried to find out what happens between them. And here are 6 pictures. I think we started out with 9. In the end, it was 7 part projects that we did. So some were about increasing security on stage through these technologies, educating about theater technology history, about the history of theater architecture, educating new theater technicians that are studying this in Berlin, for example. We're using it as a tool to do the virtual Bauprobe, the virtual stage stage model, like a virtual stage rehearsal. So how can the technology be used in that? And that's what I'm talking today with you about, is how can it also be a live performance or an experience that happens live on stage? That was for us very important because we didn't only use it in these more rather practical elements, we also wanted to create something artistic. So into this research project we jumped in with the question, what is a hybrid reality stage performance anyways? What could that be? And one of the things that we first thought of, because it's the standard of putting a VR headset on as being alone, we said the first thing is we put the headset on and not alone, but are in a group of other people. So the first thing was connecting people instead of isolating them by putting the headset on. It was the first statement that we said, okay, this is a hybrid reality stage performance, it's more than one person. And another thing was that we just claimed that through the technology we can bring musicians and the audience together into something that is shared. Okay? And then we did some testing. And now I will show you this creative process that has been a bit chaotic at some points, but it was fun nevertheless. So this, by the way, is Franziska, my colleague and partner in this project, playing the flute. And first she painted a virtual picture, a virtual garden of what she feels when she plays this song. And a friend of ours was then led through this garden by her. So that was interesting because we had this very close connection between the audience of one person and the musician. So we can also, that works better in German, moving the audience, das Publikum bewegen. But the idea was, okay, it's interesting to have the audience not sit on somewhere in the audience, but actually be moving through whatever is going to happen. And then we tested it with other musicians, and that was David Wedel from Gewandhausorchester in Leipzig. And it was fun in a way, but he was not so amused. It was not easy for him to play his violin, his instrument. So, okay, we said, basically the idea is good. We can bring the audience and emotion, but not the musician, at least not him, and he was the one we wanted to work with. So what other ways can we do to bring audience and musician together? And Then we gave him the headset and painted virtually in space, and he reacted to what we did. And that was interesting. There's something happened at this moment that we said, okay, we're onto something here. We want to create a moment of co-creation. We want to make a moment where audience and musician do something together. Is this possible? So it works on this one-to-one area, it works. So okay, let's go for it. And then we said, okay, then the other thing was, okay, we want to bring the headset back to the audience though, because yeah, they are the audience and we want them to see something and not just a musician with the headset on, but we want them to see something. So then the next question was, how can an audience, without having to be onboarded complexly, how you paint and how to use a controller or whatever, how can they be empowered to do something in space that the musician then can react to? And we had, and it was pandemic. At this time it started the pandemic, so we did a lot of work on Miro and bringing images together. It was like a, this part of this process was a lot of things happened online. So we started with, okay, we want to make traces in space and he can then react to. And we did some testings about that under weird conditions. We couldn't go into the houses, but we could go into our houses, so it was very private at some point. But then he said, well, that doesn't work because I and Sasha at this moment did two completely different things, and he as a musician could not react. He had to choose on which person to react. And when we talk about a bigger audience, I'm not talking 200 people, but more than one actually, it's more complicated for him. So okay, we found out the audience has to act as a collective entity rather than individuals. Okay, how can we do that? So we tried to bring parts of the audience together into a superstructure in a way, if you would call it like that. And so the number 3 came back over and over again during the process. And one of the things is that we create a triangle of 3 parts of 3 people of the audience. By their position in space, they always form a triangle. And this triangle over time goes up and creates some sort of virtual dynamic sculpture or building. Some would say, okay, this is like a skyscraper. Others would say, okay, this is just a visual form. Others would see it as a sculpture. So it was different interpretations of that. Okay, we have that. And it worked. So we tested it and it worked. He could react to whatever happened there spatially. And then we still had something. We have people moving in there, and at this point they had no body. They were just positions in space. Okay, we said then, okay, we have to give them some sort of avatar, some sort of costume. And this costume had also some functions, like every costume has. So one of them first was, when we have this performance, we need 1.50 meter distancing, yeah? So we said, okay, let's start with a circle that has 1.50 meter in diameter. So, okay, let's start with that. Of course, with that, at some point, the triadic ballet will pop up. And a funny side effect in thinking about ballet and dancing was, okay, this triggered something else. Is maybe we can use the costume to actually activate the people. And we did that by giving these rings a physicality in a way, a virtual physicality. So if I move very fast, those rings will slide like a wedding dress. Like they stay in place a bit slower, and so some of those are right here, and they will move with me. And actually that worked, that people started moving to see how this costume will react to what they do. So we had an activated audience. We activated them with the costume. And then we, of course, also needed a place, because in the beginning we had a very vast emptiness, and people did not react well to that. They kind of had the feeling of falling through. Yeah, I'm influenced by cyberpunk in the 80s, and so that is a very big part of what I am. So the first ideas of how that could be came from that direction. Also because I tried to bring it down to the basics of, okay, we need some floor so people don't have the feeling of falling through. Okay, let's create a grid. When we are in the virtual environment, let's just do that, some laser grid. And then came some, stylistic things. But in the end, it is a very simple setup. We have some floor, we have this element that goes into the horizon, and we have some horizon elements. And with these basic elements, we created different kinds of landscapes and different kinds of atmospheres that we could trigger. So we called this a virtual scenography in a way. And then we needed a venue. There was a festival, the Sommerkonzert in Volkenroda, so a classic music festival in the middle of nowhere, I would say, in Germany. But people go there, and in this festival, it had so many nice areas, like a big church, but we needed space, so we went where the donkey is. And but the good thing was we had space. This is what happens when you have people organizing something in Miro. It will always look like something like this. And then we had another triangle between the activated audience on one side, the musician on the other, and our scenography, Vijay, who was actually in real time manipulating the environment between the different designs that we had, and she could see, okay, how the people move, how the music is, and try to find a balance or find something between that. And that is, in a way, the basic setup. We have 3 actors, and they co-create in this environment, because our musician said, I will let them dance by my violin. I will move them. I said, I'm not so sure. I'm guessing the people will move in their different way, and you might be reacting to them. And then with the scenography and if it's dark, if it's getting people closer, if it's bright, people go further apart. All these things had a big impact also. So I'm showing this because it was fun. This is our musician, and in the last minute, he still gave us inputs. And we still had to implement them because it said, okay, we really need, he saw these kids jump and he said, okay, we need something. When people jump, something has to happen. And we hadn't implemented that yet. Yeah, so yeah, okay, we need people jumping. And I'm coming later to the point why I'm showing you this. It's about the agility of the process. So this was the venue, this was then the night, and this is the trailer of what it looked like. So what you hear is how he plays the violin. He plays in an orchestra, but he's also like a jazz electro violinist who can improvise on the spot. The people were moving very differently. Sometimes it also was important if the people knew each other, or if it was an audience of people who were complete strangers, because people who knew each other tended to go closer in a group. Other people were just roaming around, and that had a reflection on the music and the environment. And the environment tried to force them to bring them a bit together. So she had a knob for fog, so you couldn't see so far, and when you couldn't see so far, you tried to be closer to each other. And all those things were different parameters that could be used, and every performance was completely different in its sound, in its movement, in the way people reacted to the space. So, yeah, we had a very interesting and intense week, and then afterwards we had this performance at other venues, but mostly in an education context in universities. It was more of an experiment. So some of the learnings of this project were, it is not possible in a way that we knew from before, from artistic, scenographic projects. It was a very iterative development, so we had to We had an idea, we had a statement, then we checked the statement, we had to revise everything that we did before under these new conditions, and then adapt in our development and creation process, and maybe throw everything overboard that we thought before, and adapt to the new situation. And that we had to do time over time over time. That's why I showed you this process. It's a different process than we know from theater normally. Simplicity versus complexity. A lot of people said, okay, you can do so much in virtual reality. Why didn't you do some dramaturgy and whatever? The simpler it gets, it's still complicated enough, so the simpler it gets, the better. And also for the people to understand, because we had to put them the headset on, and that's next, the last thing is on and off boarding. We had to have people on site who could tell the audience, because the audience was young people, old people, middle-old people. Some people knew about the technology, but the most didn't, never had a headset on. So we had this onboarding process of what happens, why did we do what we do, what can you do when you put the headset on. And people lost fear relatively quickly and lost themselves in this immersive environment. People were rolling on the floor with the headsets, and we said, oh God. Or we're running from one end to the other, and we said, so hopefully the tracking works well and no one runs into each other, because that was very experimental also. And time for testing, and this is a bit that goes further into the end. This is, as institutions, as houses, as those who are enabling those processes need time. They need money, but more than everything, they need time. Time for testing, time for exploration, time for experiment, and that is something that we have to give there. In the research project already, it was not easy enough to find the time for experiments. But we said every second Friday is Freaky Friday, and we just try stuff out. Yeah? And this is something that is not yet in the minds of people who make the work plans or think about work situations, but they are there in the companies, the startup companies. They understood that you need the time to create, you need the time to be creative and do it without a project in the background. A day where no meeting is about project whatever, yeah, but it is a day of free roaming, letting the mind explore whatever, something, or just game. So this is the one project I wanted to show you and give you an insight on how to the processes of that and what the situation was. So what's to come? The research project from DTHG ended, but the findings are, we have a publication, you can download, we even translated it into English more or less. And the DTHG association itself uses the knowledge that we created in workshops, transferring this knowledge into the theater houses, opera houses, so people in houses in Germany book those workshops and learn about immersive technologies. They do a lot of different things. One of the most looked after workshop, and that's most of the time booked out, is this about the virtual stage rehearsals. And this is another talk. This is completely another talk. I could talk about an hour or more about this itself, but it was really, really helpful for a lot of the theaters to be able to virtually meet and talk on a stage about the stage design. Yeah, so they do that. And for me, the question still stays in space, and it was even before I had the project with DTHG. What is happening in this intersection between the physical space, us being physical spatial objects, and the virtual space, an area, a space where something can happen, a lot of things can happen, but what happens in between those things? And this is something that I will be researching into further in my university. I am right now creating this Future Realities Lab, what I call it. It's part of the School of Culture and Design where I'm teaching. And I'm very happy if someone wants to collaborate and investigate those questions in the future. Please reach out. And yeah, I think this is my last slide, slightly last slide. There was one thing that I wanted to talk to you about, what maybe is required from seeing those things. Okay, I'm skipping the existing connection, but new forms of this theater, and that's what I see these technologies as, is they enable us to find new channels, create completely new ways of what stage can be. But they need new processes, they need more new methods. We cannot use the same methods before. It's a completely new medium. We have to understand that. It's a new medium and we have to new methods. It needs and it has already adventurous theater makers. There are a lot of people who are trying this out on the ground level, but there is a movement that is far more rapid than what I see in the auto industry or the medical industry. No one moves as fast as theater makers. I used to work with virtual reality in museums. It's interesting, but they're not so fast and not so creative as theater people, and that's awesome. There's a lot of potential in this how people because it's always space, it's art, it's music. There's so many elements involved in that. Okay, we have to be in the forefront of innovation and not the one stumbling behind, right? The theater is the one who can push those things. But that needs houses who are open to change, and it needs investment. Of course, a bit into technology, but most of all, into people and skills. So the peoples in the theater have to learn about the technology. And it's not something that you put over them, it's something that you give an opportunity to learn about, and then people will go there and will try it out. And it's more a persistent openness than telling them you have to learn that, otherwise your theater house will die. No, but you have to give them the opportunity. If they want to learn about this technology, here it is. It also needs forgiving and open audiences. Not every city has that, not every audience works the same. Some audiences might not be open to that. Depends a bit, you have to know your audience. And once you did a project on that, did experiments, created knowledge about that, we have to transfer the knowledge into the landscape of theater in general. I'm working myself on a platform in Germany for that is Nachkritik Plus, where we try to bring all the knowledge of digitality into one place as an open access platform for everyone to okay, how did this work again? How did they do it? And I make a lot of, okay, we have to share our knowledge and not keep it for ourselves. It's not an intellectual property, it's some way for us to be more resilient. And yeah, and that was the last slide.